About what happened?
Well, there's a lot going on, as you might imagine, but DJJ internal documents indicate that some staff knew there were issues brewing between two groups of juveniles before all this transpired. The reports show that evening the door system dividing those groups of juveniles failed, the kids rushed out, and the fight began. Afterwards, at least one youth told staff they felt the violence was, quote, set up by security. At least two staffers had some of the same concerns. Again, a warning, some images in this story are graphic.
This is Divine Johnson, photographed after the June 2nd incident. He was one of two juveniles at the Broad River Road complex who were hospitalized with head injuries after being attacked by other juveniles. Johnson suffered a concussion, while the other juvenile is reported to have needed staples in his head. Grief and questions from Johnson's loved ones followed.
I really looked at this picture and I asked God, why would this happen to him? He has great talent and he was progressing tremendously.
So we need justice, we need answers. They're saying that the fight broke out over a phone. How did the phone get back there? How did the weapons get involved? Where was the staff? Like, we need answers.
I submitted a Freedom of Information request to the department, asking for its records on what happened. I got 24 reports from DJJ staffers and contract workers. The names of the youth involved in those reports are redacted, but they do show there were warning signs.
The department records show the assault took place in the Holly unit, a fenced-in dorm. It's split into 3 pods. A staffer reports the juveniles are divided into those pods based off how they get along, and issues began that morning. At 2:30 a.m. on June 2nd, a staffer reports one youth insinuated that he was going to fight another youth. 3 hours later, a different staffer wrote he was informed of a possible youth-on-youth assault. A former contract employee put it simply.
A-pod and C-pod had some conflicts with each other.
At 1:40 p.m., the first round of violence. We're using dots to represent the juveniles, but it's unclear how many were involved. Multiple reports describe a fight pitting the Holly Unit A-pod against the C-pod, where a staffer says Divine Johnson was located. A staffer reported the C-pod juveniles were able to push their pod door open to fight the A-pod juveniles. The contract employee I spoke with worked in the control room.
Could the doors be secure on your screen, but maybe not secure in reality?
Correct. If the kids have something stuck in the door, then it's not secured in reality. It may look secured on my screen, but it's not really secured.
The DJJ says it is now in the process of assessing the pod doors and replacing them if necessary. The department also has plans to add doors within the pods to help with staff safety.
Security was able to control the fight earlier in the day, but the violence wasn't over.
At 5:35 p.m., multiple reports explain how 4 juvenile corrections officers were giving out dinner in the Holly unit. Again, we're using dots to represent the juveniles, but the number of juveniles involved is unclear. 4 reports, including Captain Eric Favors, describe how he took a youth out of the C-pod. The contract staffer would later identify that youth as Johnson. At that point, accounts differ. One staffer says a second youth had gotten out, and then suddenly all pods were open and no longer secured. A second staffer says an A-pod juvenile kicked the pod door open, and juveniles ran out. The C-pod juveniles were also able to rush past a corrections officer, trying to hold them back. A third report stated B-pod was open as well. Reports were consistent on this point. Weapons, including socks with locks, were used. Officer Tierra Martino wrote how she saw 2 juveniles stop on the head of a juvenile with JROTC combat boots. She wrote she was given a directive from Captain Favor to allow the juveniles to fight until assistance arrived. She wrote assistance came moments later, breaking up the mob with chemical munitions. Johnson and another youth were taken to the hospital for treatment.
He don't deserve to get beat the way that he did.
How long did y'all get to beat him like this? Like,
How did y'all let this happen?
In the aftermath, the allegations began. 2 reports included youth making allegations the fight was set up. One report read that a youth felt like he was set up by Captain Favor. Meanwhile, Favor expressed concerns to his superiors about the violence on June 2nd. He wrote, "I do have several concerns regarding possible staff contribution to the original assault." The report is unclear on if he was referencing the first assault on June 2nd or the second later that day, which resulted in the hospitalizations. The clearest allegation came from DJJ employee Anna Gervais, writing that she heard Officer Martino state how she will allow for the youth to fight. Gervais declined an interview, but told us that conversation happened in the afternoon before the, quote, event. Gervais didn't respond to requests for clarification.
The department spokesperson says the agency fired Favor and Martino no longer works at the DJJ. Attempts to contact Martino for this story were unsuccessful, while Favor declined an interview request. For the DJJ's part, it says that it has instituted leadership changes at the Division of Security and Operations. It declined to talk security procedures, but did say it's brought about staff training, daily searches, and removed ROTC boots, among other changes in the aftermath of the incident.
A DJJ staffer says Johnson remains at the Broad River Road complex, and the DJJ says there are pending family court cases related to the incident.
So the day after the incident, the Department of Juvenile Justice referred to it as a group disturbance brought under control in 15 minutes. The department spokesperson said the injuries to Johnson and the other youth weren't major. The internal records, of course, called the incident an assault on juvenile by mob. The department stood by its description when I reached out, saying it wants to use terms that people are familiar with.
Well, but it's fair to say more than a general disturbance when you take a look at the injuries that the kids received. Let me ask you this, the SLED investigation, what do we know about where that stands?
Yeah, so reached out to SLED. Of course, they declined to comment because it is an ongoing investigation, of course. We do know 11 youth are involved in this, and as the department touched on, there are some family court cases playing out there as well. We did look into court records, could not find any civil or criminal action related to any employees potentially related to this situation.
And of course, the DJJ is a cabinet agency and answers to Governor Henry McMaster. What's his office saying about all this?
Yeah, so we did just get a statement today. The governor's office sent a statement saying that Director Hendrick, the director of the DJJ, she has a game plan. That game plan takes time. The governor is focused on addressing the mental health crisis in the state's youth. And you can read more about exactly what the governor said and, of course, all about what transpired on WISTV.com.